I have also been subjected to a rather ridiculous smear, and one to which I am eager to respond. In fact, so eager that I invited the author of the smear to appear on this radio show and to try to defend himself and his charges against me. Of course, Keith Olbermann refused to do that. He is the sportscaster who does a liberal opinion show on MSNBC, which, as we've said before on this radio program, stands for mostly stuff nobody cares about. And one of the things he does a regular feature on the worst person in the world.
The winner, Michael Medved, writing and posting at townhall.com a defense of slavery in the United States. He calls it 6 Inconvenient Truths About the U.S. and Slavery. I don't have time for the whole thing, but some of the highlights. Number 2, quote, slavery existed only briefly and in limited locales in the history of the Republic, involving only a tiny percentage of the ancestors of today's Americans. And number 6, quote, there's no reason to believe that today's African Americans would be better off if their ancestors had remained behind in Africa. And Mike, you heard about Appomattox Courthouse and Jefferson Davis getting arrested and Michael, good God, go back to reviewing movies. Medved, today's worst person in the world.
I never defended slavery. This is a flat-out lie. My friend Dennis Prager made the case that I ought to sue Keith Olbermann for slander, because it is a slander. I never defended slavery. I've never defended slavery. I never would defend slavery. There is nothing in my column, which is a lengthy column. This is the very first sentence in the column, okay? Those who want to discredit the United States and to deny our role as history's most powerful and preeminent force for freedom, goodness, and human dignity invariably focus on America's bloody past as a slave-holding nation. The enslavement of literally millions of Africans counts as one of our 2 founding crimes, and an obvious rebuttal to any claims that this republic truly represents the land of the free and the home of the brave. Okay, these are my words. Does it sound like I'm defending slavery? I mean, when I talk about, in the very first sentence, America's bloody past as a slaveholding nation, and when I talk about the enslavement of literally millions of Africans, and here's what I say, and this is the whole theme of my piece, and I'd be very glad to discuss it, that America didn't invent slavery, but we did contribute disproportionately to inventing the abolition movement that ultimately got rid of slavery. And I certainly don't think that Keith Olbermann, apparently his lips would have gotten tired if he had to read my entire column. That's why he said, we don't have time for it. We'll just take 2 points out of context. Keith Olbermann, when he says, Mike, you ever heard of Appomattox? Okay, Keith, anytime you want to get into a mano on who knows more about Civil War history, war between the states, I'm ready. Bring it, buddy. And as to this, Mike, why don't you go back to reviewing movies? I've been doing this show for 11 years. I've published 10 books. 5 of them have nothing to do with movies. They're about history and about social and cultural and political topics, okay? I did these books before, many of them, before I became a film critic. Keith Olbermann has 0 background in anything. He's never worked in politics. He never attended law school. He never worked for politicians. He never worked as a speechwriter. He was never a political consultant. I've been all these things. Keith Olbermann, why don't you go back to sports broadcasting, which really is a demanding field, I know. And I used to actually enjoy Keith Olbermann as a sportscaster because he was caustic and he was sarcastic. It was kind of amusing. But for Keith Olbermann to say to me, Keith, buddy, baby, boobala, what is your qualification, sir, to talk about politics or history at all? Can we do that thing again? And what is he talking about Appomattox? What does Appomattox have to do with slavery? Appomattox was where Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia to Grant. Actually, the Western Army, the Confederate Army under General Johnston, didn't surrender until a bit later. But here's what he said, and what is he talking about?
Hey, Mike, you heard about Appomattox Courthouse and Jefferson Davis getting arrested?
Okay, first of all, Jefferson Davis didn't get arrested in Appomattox Courthouse. He wasn't anywhere near Appomattox Courthouse. Is he suggesting I should be arrested by federal troops like Jefferson Davis because I was a slaveholder? What is this? Hey, by the way, Keith, slavery was eliminated by the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which had nothing to do with Appomattox Courthouse, happened afterward. And then the Emancipation Proclamation, of course, was 2.5 years before Appomattox. So what is it, sir, that you exactly are talking about? This simply goes along with a tendency of the left to flail and to say things to try to go back to one of their favorite techniques, which is that anybody who is on the right is by definition some kind of racist, some kind of bigot, some kind of hater. And I have never in my life defended slavery or suggested that it was a pretty interesting institution. It had a good side and a bad side. No, slavery had an entirely negative side. And I acknowledge that in my column on Wednesday, despite the fact that I'm honored as worst person in the world by Keith Olbermann of MSNBC, sportscaster Keith Olbermann, who calls the game by saying that I defended slavery, therefore I am the worst person in the world. I actually have a lot of interesting company here. Previous winners for worst person in the world include Barbara Bush, Bill Frist, Morton Kondracki, Geraldo Rivera, Brit Hume, Rush Limbaugh many times, Bill Bennett, Don Rumsfeld, Rick Santorum, Laura Ingraham, Ann Coulter many times. But it's interesting. No terrorists here. All conservatives. His worst person in the world. Does he ever pick Osama bin Laden? Does he ever pick Abu Musab al-Zarqawi? No. There's Vince McMahon. Steve Forbes had made his list. Justice Scalia made his. Look, I'm honored to be on any list that includes Justice Scalia. And by the way, this is just another example of taking things just wildly out of context. Jim, Chicago, you're on the Michael Medved Show.
Hey, it sounds like Olbermann really stroked your hair the wrong way here, and I love it, personally. Good to see that you're getting called out by a bigger platform than the pathetic little thing you got going here.
Hey, guess what? We're the 6th most listened to radio talk show in the country, New Talkers Magazine yesterday, and we have about 5 times the audience Keith Olbermann does. Talking about smears, lies, distortions, attempts to discredit conservatives by suggesting that we take outrageous points of view. I do not think it is an outrageous point of view to cite, for instance, the definitive work about American slavery. It's called Inhuman Bondage. It's written by a Yale professor named David Bryan Davis. It is universally acclaimed. Nobody questions it or thinks it's a right-wing screed. One of the points that David Bryan Davis makes, which I cite in my column, which now Keith Olbermann says showed me defending slavery, which I've never done. One of the points that I cite is that of all of the Africans who were kidnapped, brutalized, and dragged across the Atlantic Ocean to the New World, including Brazil and the West Indies, what percent ended up in what later became America, the British colonies, or to America itself? 5%. It's not only that 95% of the Africans enslaved and sent to the New World went somewhere other than the United States. It's that even more people were enslaved and brutalized by Islamic slavers who terribly abused African populations, enslaved millions. 12 million Africans were enslaved by Islamic countries, largely from East Africa, and sent to places like Arabia and the entire Islamic Muslim world. But of course, we're not supposed to say that because we're supposed to say that America is uniquely guilty, which we are not. I invited Keith Olbermann to come on my show. And if he has some problems with a column that I wrote, let's talk about the actual column. I guarantee you Keith Olbermann didn't even read my column. Again, when you're covering all the big sports stories, it may be tough to actually think seriously about slavery. Okay, I'm being kind of goofy there. I know that Keith Olbermann tries to be on top of the stories. But it does seem to me that one of the things you might ask about is if you have a segment called The Worst Person in the World. Isn't it striking when you've chosen Ann Coulter 20 times and never chosen an Islamic terrorist? Just asking. Reasonable question, it seems to me, in this greatest nation on God's green earth.